Okay, let's talk about the CERT model of effective argument writing when citing web articles. You know, we've practiced this with books, and the citation for books, we use the author's last name and page number. But oftentimes with web articles, with websites, we don't have an author or page number. So I want to show you how to cite when you're quoting from the internet. Remember, the CERT model stands for claim, evidence, reasoning, and transition. When put together, all four of those make for an effective argument based in evidence. So let me show you an example. Here you have a CERT modeled paragraph citing from websites and using multiple pieces of evidence. Here it goes. The Dust Bowl had devastating effects on U.S. agricultural and economic systems. According to History.com, by 1940, more than 2.5 million people had fled affected areas. Nearly 10% moved to California. PBS reports that 850 million tons of topsoil blew away in 1935 alone. To create solutions, the government deployed civilian conservation corps workers to plant shelter beds and encourage contour plowing. During this period, those in the Great Plains suffered tremendous financial and agricultural setbacks, causing many to seek the American dream elsewhere. Besides poor agricultural practices, overplanting driven by high demand was also to blame for the devastation suffered during this time. So let's look at the components of this paragraph. Sentence number 1 is the claim. The job of the claim is to establish what's to be proven by the evidence in the paragraph. The Dust Bowl had devastating effects on U.S. agricultural and economic systems. This is the statement that I'm working to prove. Next comes my evidence. Remember, we always have to introduce and cite every piece of evidence. A quotation is not a sentence all by itself. It has to be introduced, and because we're taking it from an outside source, we have to cite it. So here we go. We have our claim to prove. Now we need to work to prove it. According to History.com, that's an introduction. That's how you introduce a quote. According to History.com, now I have the evidence itself. By 1940, more than 2.5 million people had fled affected areas. Nearly 10% moved to California. My evidence is borrowed from an outside source, so I use quotation marks around it, and I need to follow it with my citation. Need to give credit to the source where it was borrowed from. Effects of the Dust Bowls, the name of the website article where I took that information from. Notice that articles take capital letters and go in quotation marks. Now I'm ready for my second piece of evidence. I need to introduce it. PBS reports that. That is an introduction. Now the evidence. 850 million tons of topsoil blew away in 1935 alone. This is evidence. It belongs in quotation marks to indicate that it's borrowed from an outside source. And it must be followed by citation, the name of the article where it came from. A third piece of evidence to really make my argument effective, to create solutions, is my introduction. The government deployed civilian conservation corps workers to plant shelter beds and encourage contour plowing. Piece of evidence, it's cited coming from this article called The Dirty 30s. Now it's time for reasoning. After you have your claim and you've proven it with evidence, we need to explain how that evidence we just provided makes our claim true. Here's how I've done this. During this period, those in the Great Plains suffered tremendous financial and agricultural setbacks, causing many to seek the American dream elsewhere. What this sentence does is it proves how my evidence makes my claim statement a true message. You provide the reasoning that connects your evidence to your claim. And lastly, we need to transition to our next main idea. Here's my transition sentence. Besides poor agricultural practices, overplanting driven by high demand also was to blame for the devastation suffered during this time. My current main idea is poor agricultural practices. And my next paragraph, if I were to write it, would clearly be about overplanting driven by high demand. So you recap where you've been and you hint at where you're going next. That's your transition. So remember the CERT model of effective argument writing. When you're citing from websites, article titles go in quotation marks. And always remember that each piece of evidence must be introduced and cited.